Despite the Florida Panthers in full control of their destiny, it's going to be one heck of a roller coaster ride for the Cats and the rest of the wild card race. We're going to go over that on today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, March 16th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. Don't forget to send in your screenshot of your subscription to Locked On Florida Panthers YouTube channel and your 5-star rating on whichever podcast app you listen to Locked On Panthers, and send it over to me via DM at LO_FLA Panthers or email it to me at lockedonflapanthers@gmail.com for your chance to win 2 free tickets to the Florida Panthers versus Toronto Maple Leafs game on April 10th. Best of luck, everybody. So the Florida Panthers, it's finally a game day for this team. 4 days off, a whole bunch of help in the last few days. Not so much help on Wednesday night. I mean, the Buffalo Sabres and the Washington Capitals did face off against each other in Washington. The Washington Capitals did score on a comeback. Tom Wilson scores to tie the game, and then the Washington Capitals win in a very quick shootout, 2-0 in that one to get the extra point. Worst case scenario was for that game to go to past regulation, but as far as either one of the teams winning, it was more beneficial on the Florida Panthers side that the Caps got the win. You just wish it were in regulation. So now the Florida Panthers are ahead of the Buffalo Sabres by a point with 0 games in hand. And at one point, the Buffalo Sabres had 6, if I recall correctly. And now all those games were made up for the Sabres. You think about, even there was a snowstorm that postponed a game between them and Tampa Bay. All those games in hand are completed now. And the Sabres find themselves still behind the Panthers. The Washington Capitals tied in points. The Panthers have 2 games in hand on them. The New York Islanders on their second end of a back-to-back. Ilya Sorokin goes on the second end. Jacob Winans and I, after our recording, we were talking about, should the Islanders start Sorokin on the second end, and it's like, and we both agreed that yes, that when you're desperate for a playoff position and the Islanders not having control of their destiny, at least at the moment, that was the right decision. Of course, Sergei Bobrovsky starting on that back-to-back on the Panthers side of things, it made all the sense in the world. And a transaction for the Florida Panthers is Alex Lyon has been sent down to AHL Charlotte. Remember that he was called on an emergency basis for the Panthers, so he can go back to Charlotte without going through waivers, and gets a few starts under his belt. Likely going to be back with the team like this by the end of this weekend, after the Florida Panthers finish playing against the New Jersey Devils, for a chance for Paul Maurice to make a decision on whether Alex Lyon is going to get into a game. So it's going to keep him fresh right before he could be ready for a game, which is either Detroit or Philadelphia. But just this week alone is going to be a roller coaster ride. Like we said at the top, this is, as you can see, this is the show title of today's show. And you think about the Panthers having 3 games in hand on the New York Islanders. Well, the Panthers are going to have to go perfect in order to pass the New York Islanders, because the Islanders did win in regulation last night against the Anaheim Ducks. And at this moment in time, the New York Islanders still own the tiebreaker as far as regulation wins under their belt. They have 30, the Panthers have 28. So that is why yesterday on yesterday's show, I was a little hesitant on getting my hopes up on the Panthers making a run, because games in hand are great, but you got to win those games in hand. And that is where I'm not trying to get too high on the possible results. The game's got to be played first. Of course, we're going to get more into previewing the Montreal game in segment number 3, but just going into tonight, got to take care of business. And you just think about how going back to the next week that is, because by the time the Florida Panthers play Tuesday night against the Philadelphia Flyers, 2 of those games will already be made up as far as games in hand. So it's going to come fast. The Islanders will be on their last of their 3-game road trip on Saturday night against the San Jose Sharks. The Panthers will play 2 games before the Islanders hit the ice on Saturday night. Unfortunately, it's an NHL Network game, so anyone who has ESPN Plus, they won't be able to watch that game after the Panthers hopefully take care of business against the New Jersey Devils on Saturday. And the Panthers play on the Monday. The Islanders will be off. They'll be playing on the Tuesday against at home against the Toronto Maple Leafs. That is the Islanders, while the Panthers will be playing that second of a back-to-back on against the Philadelphia Flyers. And then the Panthers, they play a Thursday game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the New York Islanders, I believe they're off on Thursday. And yes, they are off next Thursday, and then they'll have a back-to-back at Columbus and then home against Buffalo. Watch out for that Buffalo game on March 25th. Buffalo versus New York, the Islanders. And they'll have the equal amount of games in hand after Thursday's done, but then on after Friday and Saturday, the Islanders will play one more game after Saturday's games are done for the Panthers too. And the Panthers play the Rangers on the 25th, and a puck drop is 5 p.m. New York versus Buffalo, that's a 5 p.m. puck drop too. So that is a perfect dual screen type of day for Panther fans, just looking ahead 10 days from now exactly. But just to give you an idea of just there's a possibility, especially if the Panthers win all those games in hand. That's the key. There could be a flip-flop of Panthers getting ahead, New York getting ahead for one, all the way until the end. And that alone is key to the importance of why, games in hand or not, is just to control what you can control. And maximum amount of points has the Florida Panthers at 103 with the New York Islanders at 102. Of course, they're not going to go perfect. Just not going to happen. The Islanders do have the easier strength of schedule than the Panthers, which is why on a night like the New York Islanders being idle, like tonight, is super important for the Florida Panthers to just go ahead, take advantage, and just come out with a damn dub. That's the best way I can put it. In segment number 2, we are going to discuss some of the key dates that have been announced from the GM meetings in South Florida. We're going to talk about the salary cap. We're going to talk about Gary Bettman's comments post GM meetings. We're going to discuss that all next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel Sportsbook. And we're at the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and easy to use. Then you can bet on anything from the money line, point scores, to threes drained. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss your chance on your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/locked on. That's fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment number 2 here on this Thursday, March 16th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers will be taking the ice in a game setting. It's great to see that we all got a few days off from at least our specific team playing, got to enjoy some hockey, got to enjoy some news around the NHL on what's to come. So normal free agency is going to be July 1st, as it usually is. The draft lottery is going to be on May 8th at 7 p.m. We're hoping that the Florida Panthers pick to the Montreal Canadiens isn't participating in that draft lottery, as that was the part of the Ben Sherratt trade. So how do the Panthers not participate in the draft lottery? Hey, making the playoffs. So but that's a key date to circle on the calendars in the case that the Panthers do not advance to the postseason. Stanley Cup final tentative date is going to be June 3rd, just in case. But that's the tentative date. But it could be pushed back earlier depending on if the other series end earlier than expected. Big one here. Anticipated salary cap is only to be a bump of 1 million, about when talking about escrow payments being paid back at a certain percentage. As of right now, Gary Bettman is anticipating it to be an only $1 million bump, but they're open to discussion with new executive director of the NHLPA, Marty Walsh, who's of course replacing Donald Fear. Of course, everything that happened with the whole Kyle Beach situation has had to be replaced after everything that went down, or and the lack of action. And he is anticipated to start this Monday, March 20th. And Bettman also discussed about the divisional format and saying that it's working just fine, saying that. But I roll my eyes, but at the same time, you can't expect this commissioner, especially, that when something isn't working in their favor, that he is going to admit to his wrongs. I mean, for the longest time, even when the Atlanta Thrashers were a threat to move, consistently saying they're not going to move, not going to move, not going to move. And then there's that opportunity for an ownership group in Winnipeg to move him out of Atlanta. Then he comes out and says, "Oh, we're moving." And it gives me the same vibe with the Coyotes. I don't want the Coyotes to move. I don't. I'm cheering for small market teams to succeed. And Gary Bettman is just putting the PR face on him when it comes to defending a market and saying we're going to do our best to keep hockey in this market, but there's still no approval of an arena deal there, and we won't know until May if there is a approval for Arizona. So take everything he says with a grain of salt when it comes to when it comes to divisional format, because I get you want you want division rivals to face each other more often. I mean, we saw Crosby and Ovechkin battle out for so many years, but wouldn't that be better in a conference final setting versus a second round? Think about it. Just like Maple Leafs and Lightning this year, this is likely uh, in some years that you could see this as a conference final type of matchup, but we're going to see this likely in round one. So it's just they gave it a try. It's been quite a while now that they've had this format, and I just think, and players have spoken about it. I mean, Gary Bettman has also spoken about how of digital ads, about how people are enjoying it. For me personally, I got used to it, that it's just there now. I'm mostly it's I don't really it doesn't catch my attention as much anymore as it did in like the first few weeks. So if it helps revenue, if it helps with salary cap and these players, their ability to get paid too, I think it's a good opportunity to bring in more. I mean, you see hockey games over in Europe. There's advertisements everywhere, even on in the face-off circles too. We're not there yet with the NHL, but it's don't I don't doubt if the NHL is getting one step closer to going in that direction as far as generating revenue in order to increase salary cap, increase franchise value, because that's Gary Bettman's job. Gary Bettman's job is to increase franchise value for all of these owners. Remember, the owners are his bosses, not the other way around. So as far as going back to salary cap and the 1 million bump that is at least minimum anticipated, the Panthers still have room to work with regardless of it, of everything. I mean, last time I checked, it was about $11 million in salary cap space. Refreshing my cap friendly as we speak, just over 10 million as we speak for players under contract. We spoke about how there's about 21 contracts on the Panthers this coming off season, whether it's RFAs and UFAs combined, that are up for new deals. The big, as far as in-house candidates, the one major question mark of all of them, actually two. Radko Gudas are the Panthers going to re-sign him or let him walk and go a little younger? And then the other one is Grigory Denisenko. He's an RFA. They're likely going to give him a contract just because they don't want to lose him for nothing. That's a first round pick. I know he hasn't scored a goal yet. I know that it's a little bit up and down when he does go back to Charlotte after having a stint with the Panthers, but you don't want to lose him for nothing. He's likely going to be given a contract, like I would say 99% chance that he does, but that is a player that is kind of on watch for the Panthers come next season as far as in-house candidates. And they already took care of Spencer Knight last offseason. So Bill Zito got ahead of the game. So now the real work is is Bill Zito gonna bring in from the outside, and likely one of the Sams are gonna get traded. If you're looking at trying to trade a forward to increase your defense, which is giving me that feeling more and more that Radko Gudas is not going to come back for the Panthers. We talked about the possible logjam yesterday as far as Lucas Carlson and Matt Kierstead too, but trading away a Sam Reinhart with 1 year left on his deal come this offseason, $6.5 million, you're talking almost like 17 million just like that, when the Panthers were in this squeeze this season, and to have so much relief, bring it from the front end to the back end, and then we know how streaky he is. We've seen it all season, but the value that you could possibly get back for him, which the Panthers have already gotten immense value here and there, but as far as free agents go, it's not, as far as UFAs, it's not the best class coming in as far as defensemen. John Klimberg would want a long-term deal. I wouldn't want to give John Klimberg a 1 year, a long-term deal for someone just who's almost 31 years old. Matt Dumba has been a scratch with the Minnesota Wild. He here and there, and he's been in trade rumors for forever, and he hasn't been part of a trade for the Minnesota Wild. Dmitry Orlov is going to be a UFA, but what do the Boston Bruins do as far as extending him and keeping him around? So Shane Gostisbehere, a guy who's a power play quarterback who got traded to the Carolina Hurricanes as well. That's one to keep an eye on. But I also think that Bill Zito could also try to trade for somebody under contract too. So don't rule out that possibility. And Elliot Freeman brought up Erik Karlsson again on 32 Thoughts the other day, and I just don't know how that's going to work with what San Jose is going to take back as far as salary. Their number is as far as I know, for Mike Greer, is still 18% retained salary. So that would be around like 9 million that the Panthers would keep for 4 more seasons, 3 or 4 more seasons, one of those two. I just don't know if that production that Erik Karlsson put up this season for San Jose is going to carry over to the next. So I'd be very hesitant to make a trade for Erik Karlsson there for the Panthers to bring him in, even though that does improve your defense by a lot. And we love Radko, but if you bring in an Erik Karlsson, it's goodbye Radko. He's likely walking unless you really are full speed ahead as far as going for it, contending, and you see Radko Gudas as a third pairing defenseman who is okay with not getting a pay bump. By all means, have both. But I'm sure Radko would want a pay bump too. So I'm not gonna crap on him for wanting to get an increase in pay, especially since he's bettered his reputation. He hasn't gotten in trouble on the ice as far as on ice antics, suspensions, and you name it for Radko. So he's likely going to get a little bit of a bump, not significant, but a little bit. So in segment number 3, we are going to discuss the Panthers' upcoming game against the Montreal Canadiens tonight, as the Panthers are now back in action after 4 days off. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Thursday, March 16th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers finally play a game after 4 days off. And I was just looking back at some episode titles and just the tone that I was discussing this Florida Panthers team at the time. And I just remember after an episode that dropped on January 9th. What happened on January 9th specifically? I'm glad you asked. The Panthers played exactly 41 games. Exactly 41. So their record at the time was 18, 19, and 4. A points percentage just under 500. I believe on the top of my head, it's 488. Now, the Panthers, through the last 26, 15, 8 and 3, with about a 620 points percentage in that span. And at the time, I was saying the Panthers hit the halfway mark in huge trouble. Now the Panthers are well in control. Of course, it's like we said in segment number 1, they got to be perfect as far as games in hand made up. Of course, an Islanders loss against Anaheim yesterday would have definitely put them in the driver's seat. And Money Puck had both the Panthers and the Islanders at 49% to make the postseason. But after the New York Islanders beat the Anaheim Ducks, New York is 58% now. Panthers are 43. So big 14-point swing just there alone. 15-point swing in percentage points. But going back to this matchup between the Florida Panthers and the Montreal Canadiens, and man, the first 2 matchups for these two teams were just fun if you're a Florida Panthers fan. I mean, Sasha Barkov, a first period hat trick in the first game, and this was where Sasha Barkov was coming off an injury Radko Gudas was back from an injury as well, and the Panthers are starting to get healthy. It's funny, whenever there's an extended break, because that was the Christmas break for the Panthers, they they always benefit from that, as far as when they're dinged up and being able to rehab some injuries and just come back. They've always, at least for the most part, they've come out that first game blazing hot. Uh, Barkov, like I said, first period Hattie, uh, 5 points in that one. The Matthew Tkachuk has 2 goals in the first one, and Matthew Tkachuk 2 more goals in the second one. This was the game where Sergei Bobrovsky left early. Just 2 minutes in, Alex Lyons starts the next 6 games for the Panthers and really saves the Panthers season in that stretch, especially that game against the Boston Bruins. Eric Stahl was left early after a penalty that wasn't called, that should have been a penalty on Mike Matheson. For interference that had Eric Stahl miss quite a few games there too. But the Panthers, the second one especially, let's not forget that the second Montreal game against the Montreal Canadiens, that was the game after the Panthers head coach Paul Maurice complained about the officiating against the Toronto Maple Leafs, got fined for that one. Of course, we all know the history between Paul Maurice and Laurent Brossoit, the official of that game. And then the very next game, the referees give the Florida Panthers 8 power play opportunities, which the Florida Panthers cashed in on 4. The On the season, the Panthers are 7 of 14 against the Montreal Canadiens on the power play. The penalty kill in the first matchup wasn't the best, but the Panthers were already up so many goals that it basically canceled each other out for as far as penalty kill. But as far as the season, they didn't allow a power play goal in the second matchup. So for the season series, they're 7 of 9 against Montreal. The Habs do have former Panther Chris Tierney on their squad, manning the fourth line center. One of the big trades for the Habs was acquiring Denis Gurianov for former Panther Evgeny Dodonov. Of course, the Habs were sellers at the trade deadline, but also the Habs, they're they have a whole bunch of injuries on their roster. Christian Dvorak is out for the season with a knee injury. Brendan Gallagher has been out since January 8th, up and down with IR stints. Arbor Jacki, who is a wonderful story as far as making it to the NHL out of junior and just not giving up. 32 Thoughts did have an episode with interviewing his parents and also interviewing him and his journey. Kirby Dach is out indefinitely. Cole Caulfield has been out since January, and still, when you look at goals tallied, Cole Caulfield is still the leading goal scorer on the Habs. Of course, Nick Suzuki's still playing, manning that first line center, the captain of the Montreal Canadiens. Yaroslav Slavkovsky, their number 1 overall pick, he has been out and his knee injury. His diagnosis was 3 months out due to injury. Jake Evans has been out since early January with a knee injury, and it's just half of. It feels like half of Laval is on the Montreal Canadiens team, and I mean you look at the lineup, and it's the lineup of quite a few unfamiliar faces when it comes to the Habs. Of course, they're in a rebuild. We know what Kent Hughes and Marty St. Louis are trying to do as far as building it from the ground up, even though it's been a few years since they've been to the Stanley Cup final. But of course, that was a team that was carried by their goaltender, Carey Price, who's likely not going to play hockey again. But you think of players that you probably wouldn't expect to be part of the lineup, like Raphael Harvey Pinard, a 7th round pick, who's playing on the Montreal Canadiens, as far as being on the top line, a 7th round pick, playing on their top line next to Nick Suzuki. Jesse Yolin as well, another second round pick for the Habs from 2018. he's playing on that top line too. So Nick Suzuki is manning a top line of two guys still on their ELC. So it's a little bit of a tough battle for the Canadiens, and this is a matchup that the Florida Panthers need to take advantage. They went into Pittsburgh and manhandled the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, but the Penguins, they're still having a lot of questions in goal right now, even though Tristan Jarry has been back from injury, and he struggled ever since coming back. And of course, let's go to their blue line as well. The they're also have a defenseman who 8 defensemen on the roster, and one of them is still on their ELC, and Jordan Harris, a third round pick. Daily Faceoff doesn't have him in the regular rotation, but you also think about how it's a revolving door of players going in and out of the lineup too. Sean Monahan is a game time decision for the Habs. Who was someone that Kent Hughes was trying to trade for, but injury history is a concern. Joel Edmondson as well was a guy who Kent Hughes was trying to trade for, but injury concerns are an issue there. So didn't get what they wanted as far as compensation for what they were trying to do at the trade deadline this past trade deadline. And for if we had to guess who was starting for the Habs, it's likely going to be Jake Allen. Jake Allen was pulled in their matchup on Monday night against the Colorado Avalanche. Sam Montembeault, former Panther, who's actually developed quite well over in Montreal. Of course, was never going to get a huge opportunity with the Florida Panthers based on what Sergei Bobrovsky's contract is, and of course drafting Spencer Knight. But great to see that Sam Montembeault has done better for himself over in Quebec. But for the Panthers, it's just key is win the special teams battle, and if you win the special teams battle, the Panthers should not have a problem getting a W in this one. And a regulation win is so huge to try to get any tie-breaking advantage over the New York Islanders, and that's really what I'm emphasizing and hoping for the Panthers to get. So it's likely going to be Jake Allen. Sam Montembeault did start in their game against the Pittsburgh Penguins on the road. That was the second end of a back-to-back. But the Panthers, they got to feel good about going into this matchup because neither of the games against Montreal this season have been close, and especially with how they've performed on the power play, going 50% on it. And just got to hope it continues tonight for this Panthers team. And I do want to read, before we get out of here, I do want to read a quote from Sasha Barkov that Jameson Olive of FloridaPanthers.com did tweet. Barkov spoke about the out-of-town scoreboard, and here's what Barkov had to say. Quote, "It helps a lot. You don't pay attention to that too much, but we know we have a really good chance to make it. We're playing really well right now, doing the right things on the ice. We just have to keep going." Close quote. And it's very simple. Just win tonight, and you just continue to do what you can as far as controlling your own destiny, because at the end of the day, that's what the Panthers have, control of their destiny. Thank you guys for listening to this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. On tomorrow's edition of the show, it's a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show where Nick Fairbanks will be joining the show to come in and recap the Florida Panthers versus Montreal Canadiens game tonight. So hopefully we are talking about a win, but if we're talking about a loss, oh man, it might not be a fun episode. So let's hope for a dub tonight. So in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to listen to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.